All right, well, why don't we go ahead and begin. My name is John Haddad, and I teach American Studies at Penn State Harrisburg, and I'm also serving a 2-year term as president of Eastern American Studies Association. And it's my great pleasure tonight to introduce our keynote speaker, Angus Gillespie of Rutgers, professor of American Studies at Rutgers. When I learned that I would be delivering the introduction to Angus, I called him on the phone. This would be about 2 weeks ago. And I said, Angus, I could do the usual print out your CV and list all the articles that you had written and all the books that you had written, but people find that boring. And Angus, to his credit, agreed. And I said, why don't we instead go with an anecdote? And I said, like, how'd you get into this field? And Angus proceeded to regale me with an excellent story about how he was an American Studies doctoral student at the University of Pennsylvania who had chosen 4 subfields, one of which was literature, but literature met early in the morning when he was teaching at high school, and so he had to drop that and take folklore. Anyway, he told me this great story, and I wrote out a thorough speech telling you this story. Much to my surprise, earlier today, for those of you who are at the plenary, I was in the back, doing a little paperwork, and I heard Angus talking about his graduate experience at UPenn, and I said, he's not telling the story now, is he? Oh, and I listened. It was excruciating. He was. So I've had to throw out that speech and instead give you the speech of, if that was the speech of the accidental career, yeah. This introduction is looking now increasingly like an accident. So Angus is unpredictable, I should say, and I suppose the message from his anecdote is that life can be too. Well, we asked Angus to deliver the keynote for really 3 reasons. First of all, Angus is truly a bridge figure between the 2 academic disciplines featured at this conference, American Studies and Folklore. So that's the first reason. And second of all, we are in the state of New Jersey, and Angus possibly knows more about New Jersey's history and folklore than anyone else alive. That's quite likely the case. So we thought who would be a better keynote than Angus? And third, the conference theme being land and sea, Angus's research really speaks to that conference theme. He has written on New Jersey's landscapes, cityscapes, infrastructure, transportation system, civil engineering projects, and of course, all of the culture, folklore, and stories that surround those topics. And I'm pleased to say that tonight he's going to share some of those stories and some of that research with us. So I'd like you to give a warm welcome to our keynote speaker, Angus Gillespie, who will be speaking on the Jersey Devil on land and at sea. Angus Gillespie.
Thank you, John. And thank you to Will Mendez, who's helped me so much with the technical aspects of this talk. Someday in the late fall, when you're walking through the pines of South Jersey, listen carefully as the wind comes through the pines off the ocean. It almost seems that the wind is trying to tell us something, possibly someone's name. Old Mother Leeds, old Mother Leeds. It seems that Jane Leeds and her husband Daniel, they lived in a shack along the Mullica River in the Great Swamp, and people around those parts said that it was a strange family, an unusual family. Some people even said that Jane Leeds was a witch. Well, we know that it was an unusual family. The Daniel and his wife, they had 12 children. And the problem of the family was Daniel Leeds, he was a good hunter, he was a good fisherman, and he was a good gardener. There was always food on the table. That was not the problem. The problem was Daniel, he took very little interest in the children. And so Jane Leeds was left with all the domestic chores, the cooking, the cleaning, the picking things up, putting things away, chopping the woods, doing the laundry. She was exhausted. She was at her wit's end. And then, one night, she learned that she was pregnant with her 13th child. In a moment of perhaps understandable weakness, she said, Lord, as she was saying her bedtime prayer, she said, Lord, let this one not be a child. Let this one be a devil. Well, we now know that that was a mistake. Because on that terrible winter night in February of 1735, when Mother Leeds' 13th child was born, it started out as a perfectly healthy, normal little baby boy with blonde hair and blue eyes, but then something went terribly wrong. In the space of less than 20 minutes, the creature grew to the size of 2 full-grown men. In place of the little baby blue eyes, there were eyes all right, but they were red like 2 burning coals, and they were set in the horrible head of a horse. The creature had the torso of a man, the feet of a goat, the leathery bat-like wings of a bat, and a long serpentine tail. It was a very powerful creature. Massive chest, massive arms and biceps, and each arm was covered with fur. At the end of each arm was a fur-covered paw. At the end of each paw were razor-sharp fingernails. And then, unpredictably, unexpectedly, with one swipe of his right arm, the creature slit the throat of the midwife and attendants, who collapsed in a pool of blood. The creature gave out a blood-curdling scream and escaped out the chimney, where he's terrified the people of South Jersey for the last 250 years. Now, folks in these parts say that late at night, something disturbs the cattle, and the next day, the milk turns sour. Tool sheds and outbuildings are turned over. Places in the forest are scorched. Strange tracks are found round about. Have you seen Mother Leeds' 13th child? The next time you go into the woods, take care. And when you hear the sudden crack of a twig behind you, beware. Beware of the Jersey Devil. So that's the story of the Jersey Devil. And now I'm going to go to the middle of the auditorium and I'm going to try to show you some pictures that relate to the story. Well, let's take a look at the map of the state of New Jersey. New Jersey is the 4th smallest state, but with nearly 10 million people. Despite its small size, or perhaps because of its small size, New Jersey is the most densely populated state in the Union. In fact, population geographers tell us that the population density of New Jersey is greater than that of India. Now, again, taking a look at the map of the state of New Jersey, notice the shaded portion in the southeast quadrant. This is the area which is generally defined as the Pine Barrens. It's hard to say exactly what it is, but roughly speaking, from Asbury Park down to Cape May, and everything east of the Garden State Parkway, this would qualify as the Pine Barrens. And what's remarkable about the Pine Barrens, if you remember John McPhee's book from the 80s, the remarkable thing about the Pine Barrens, put away the cell phones, please, it's very distracting. Yvetta, thank you. Okay, it's not a cell phone? Oh, okay, whatever it is. Okay, thank you. The thing is that the Pine Barrens, according to John McPhee, if you were to take a string between New York and Richmond, Virginia, the exact center of that piece of string would fall at Apple Pie Hill Fire Tower, right in the middle of the Pine Barrens. Now, the interesting thing is that there are places in New Jersey, in Union County, that have 30,000 people per square mile. And yet, in the Pine Barrens, there are places with less than 3 people per square mile, which according to federal statistics means that it's a wilderness area. So what are we talking about with this wilderness area? Again, referring to John McPhee, the important thing about the Pine Barrens is that it sits on top of the Cohansey Aquifer. And the beautiful thing about the Cohansey Aquifer is that you have this sandy soil which acts like a great giant filter. Underneath that filter is water that is geologically pure. In theory, this is enough water to supply the needs of both New York and Philadelphia on into the indefinite future. Now, my friends who are hydrologists tell me that if you were to empty out all the water in the Cohansey Aquifer, all of New Jersey would be under 17 feet of water. How they calculate that, I don't know. So, my interest in the Pine Barrens is not just with the plants and the animals, but with the people who live there. And these people call themselves the Pineys. But a word of caution, it's okay for them to call themselves Piney, but it's not okay for you and me to call them Pineys. And the interesting thing is, the Pineys form a tiny subculture which follows Robert Redfield's definition of a folk society. It's a small society. It relies on self-reliance, and it's unique and distinctive. Let's take a closer look. Now, the thing that Pineys pride themselves on is their independence. Just like I told you about Daniel Leeds a moment ago. The ideal Piney lifestyle is to rely on hunting, fishing, and gardening with very little reliance on the outside economy. Now, there's a little bit of a fudge factor in there because there's certain things that the Pineys need to buy. Flour, coffee, salt, work boots, well cleaner, shotgun shells. So they're not entirely independent from the larger economy, but they do their best. So for example, this little girl is selling pine cones at Christmas time to get a little cash spending money. Pineys, they don't like working in an office from 9 to 5. They don't like working in a factory between 8 and 4. In fact, the Pineys that I've talked to, they could very well have a national anthem. Perhaps you remember from 25 years ago that famous song by Johnny Paycheck, "Take This Job and Shove It." Oh, yeah. That could be the Piney national anthem. So let me show you some pre-1978 statistics. Take a close look at this. Prior to 78, 14% of the land of the Pines was in state forest. Nearly 18% was belonged to the federal government, which meant that 68.5%, we could round up and just call it 70%, 70% was in private hands. Now, for a group of New Jerseyans, I don't have to point out what would be the consequences of having 70% of the Pine Barrens in private hands. The obvious answer is this would be ripe for development. And so something had to be done. Now, the thing is, what are you going to do about economic development in the Pines? Certain businesses were already pre-existing, such as Connie's Pine Barrens restaurant. So when you're devising the new federal legislation to protect the pines, you have to grandfather in pre-existing businesses. You can't really very well put them out of work. Now, speaking for myself, this is one of my favorite establishments after a hard day of collecting folklore and the field work. What happened back in the late 70s was there was a big debate. What should we do about the Pine Barrens? Now, it's a very interesting story. It was John McPhee's book, which came out in 1968, which sort of kicked off this debate. And a very little known fact, which I find fascinating, is that John McPhee, in addition to being a writer, he was also a tennis player. And you'll never guess who his tennis partner was. His tennis partner in Princeton was none other than Brendan Byrne. So one day they're playing tennis, and Brendan Byrne says, well, what are you working on? What's your next book? He says, I'm doing a book about the Pine Barrens. He said, well, I'd like to read it. Brendan Byrne read this book where there was a threat of having a jet port in the Pines, and Brendan Byrne said, not on my watch, and he pushed through legislation through the state legislature to protect the pines. And it wasn't easy. You know yourself, if you're the governor and you have a pet project, you have to extend a lot of favors and call in a lot of chits to get the job done. It was very controversial. One of the reasons it was controversial is a lot of the Pineys who were landowners, they were looking forward to cashing in. And they didn't want it protected. They wanted to sell out. So it was very complicated. It was very extensive. And what they came up with, it wasn't possible in the 70s. It simply wasn't possible for the federal government to purchase the land outright, like you would do with Yosemite or Yellowstone. It was just too expensive. So they had to come up with a scheme, and they came up with a scheme was a series of concentric rings. The inner centric ring was called the preservation area. And basically, you can't build anything in the preservation area. This is protected. But then the outer ring was not the preservation area, it was the protection area. And there, limited 19th century uses are permitted, such as cedar harvesting, blueberry harvesting, and cranberry harvesting. In other words, you tried to achieve the results of protection through zoning rather than through outright purchase. So it's not a national park, it's a protection area. Now here's the thing, what I tell my students at Rutgers is, let's take an imaginary tour to the Pine Barrens, and we can get on State Route 70, State Route 72, we can get on the Garden State Parkway, and we go down south, and we go through the Pine Barrens. Now, I've done this many times with my out-of-state guests. And we're driving south on the highway, and we look to the left, we look to the right, and all we see is trees. And so my out-of-state guests say, what's the big deal here? This is boring. It's just one tree after another. And I said, well, look, you have to understand, the whole trick to understanding the Pine Barrens, you got to get off the paved highways. You got to get off into the secondary roads, the sand track roads. Now we're talking. Let me see if I can do something about the focus. There we go. These sand track roads, they're very unique. The best way to deal with these sand track roads is to get a hold of U.S. Coast and Geodetic Survey maps. You can get them from your congressman or through the map office. And the deal is, these maps are the scale of 1 inch is 10,000 feet. They are highly detailed. And some of these roads go back to the Revolutionary War. They show up on the maps of General George Washington. And now we have a fighting chance of really understanding what the Pine Barrens are all about. Now the thing is, when you get off on these sand track roads, it's best to have the detailed maps, a compass, flares, a first aid kit, snake bite kit, extra blankets, extra drinking water. And here's the thing, I've been back in the pines many times with the Pineys, and we've never been lost. Let's just say it took a long time to get out of the woods. And here's the reason. You're driving along and the map shows a road, but your eyes show a swamp. And so you have to make a U-turn, turn around, and back and fill, and back and fill. And by the time you've done that several times, you get all turned around. It's very easy to get lost. So what I recommend is you have a four-wheel drive, not the family sedan. Now, my colleagues at Cook College at Rutgers, the specialists in botany and zoology, they have visitors from all over the world who come to Cook College. It's now called School of Environmental and Biological Sciences. Nobody calls it that, they call it SEBS. Anyway, people come from all over the world to Cook in order to have a guided tour of the pines because of the unique flora and fauna. And without wanting to get too bogged down, the deal about the Pine Barrens is it's the southernmost expanse of northern vegetation and the northernmost expanse of southern vegetation. Same applies to the animals. And so it's kind of unique. And the slide I'm currently showing you is a very famous area. It's called the Pygmy Pines. And you see this young graduate student, he's standing, and the trees are only coming up chest high, and he's standing in the middle of a full-grown pygmy forest. And you say, well, how come these pygmy pines are so small? And I've waded through a number of scientific papers. Some people say it's the soil. I don't know. Some people say it's the acidity. I think it's just the genetic makeup of the trees themselves. Anyway, underneath the Pine Barrens are some 17 trillion gallons of absolutely pure water, and that accounts for the economic importance of the pines. But it's kind of interesting because we often think of the pines as being a wilderness area because it's so uninhabited, or apparently uninhabited. But if we have a historical framework to work with, we realize that in the 1800s or the 19th century, there was a lot of industry in the pines. There were iron-making villages, there were paper-making villages, and there were glass-making villages. So what happened? I'll give you the short version. The reason why you had these infant industries in the pines in the 1700s and 1800s was because of the abundant availability of charcoal. But as civilization moved out west and you discovered bituminous coal in the Pittsburgh area, it was no longer economically feasible. And so most of the people who were working in these Pine Barren factories drifted away to the big cities of Philadelphia and New York, and the Pine Barrens were depopulated. Now, for people like myself from central Jersey or northern New Jersey, we often think of the Pine Barrens as a recreational resource. It's a place for camping, hiking, fishing, hunting. Myself, I've always been fond of hiking, and one of the areas where I've enjoyed hiking is in the area of the Apple Pie Hill Fire Tower, which is explicitly mentioned in John McPhee's book as being the exact center between New York City and Richmond, Virginia. Now here's the thing. If you go up to the top of the Apple Pie Hill Fire Tower and you look around 360 degrees in all directions, you see almost no signs of civilization. You would swear you're in a wilderness area. So anyway, it was about 20 years ago, I was hiking in this vicinity, and I came across something very strange, which I'd like to share with you. In a clearing, I found this group of horses' skulls. Well, immediately my mind started to race. I said, who killed the horses? And why did they kill the horses in the middle of nowhere? And besides, how come we have just the skulls and not the whole skeletons? The whole thing to me was a big mystery. So I took my concerns to the forest fire ranger at the Apple Pie Hill Fire Tower. I said, you know, I found these horses' skulls. It's just a mystery. What's going on here? He said, Doc, there's a lot of things that we don't understand in the Pine Barrens. And when things go wrong, we generally blame it on the Jersey Devil. So, like others before me, I set off in search of the Jersey Devil. And my travels took me to Busby's General Store. Busby's General Store is a very interesting place. This town, it's called Chatsworth. It's in Burlington County. And Chatsworth is generally considered the capital of the Pines. In Chatsworth, you have about 375 people, about 72 houses, a fire department, a tap room, and Busby's General Store. So this being the heart of the Pines, I came there. It was a fall day. I came down rather early from New Brunswick and parked my car, went into the store, bought myself a coffee and a Danish, and being a good student of Kenny Goldstein, I knew not to say that I was looking for folklore. I said that I was interested in the old songs and stories that this area is so well known for. And the proprietor was very kind, and he said, well, Doc, you're about 20 years too late. Now, bear in mind, this was back in the 70s. He says, you're about 20 years too late. All the old-timers have died off. I don't think anybody's around that can help you. But fortunately, unbeknownst to me, in the back room, gathered around the potbelly stove, there were 3 old-timers in bib overalls who were overhearing every word of the conversation. And one of the guys took pity on me. He said, Doc, I think I can help you. There's this guy you got to talk to. His name is Emil Brown. He lives in Hog Wallow, New Jersey. I said, well, it's not on my map. I don't know exactly where Hog Wallow is. He said, I'll help you out. He said, it's about 6 miles southeast of here. And he borrowed an envelope from the proprietor, and he made a map sketch. And sure enough, 6 miles southeast of Chatsworth is a little place called Hog Wallow, New Jersey. If I hadn't had the sketch, I never would have found it. It's on an unmarked sand track road that goes around the edge of a cranberry bog. And this is where Emil Brown was living. And wouldn't you know, it's the most amazing thing. Emil Brown was the son of Fred Brown. And Fred Brown was John McPhee's principal informant. So I really lucked out with this. So I got in my car and I drove to Emil Brown's place. Now it doesn't look like much, and it has about 3 cars in the back, but none of them run. And Emil Brown, basically he was living off the grid. No running water, no electricity, no telephone, no property tax. He was basically living with the kind indulgence of the owner of the cranberry bog, because the family had been there for generations. But again, the house doesn't look like much, but it's made of Atlantic white cedar, which is rot resistant. It's covered with tar paper. Yeah, you know about that, Nancy. And it's a very good structure. So I engaged Emil and his wife Flora in conversation. And again, it's the same old thing. I don't start talking about the Jersey Devil. I don't even start talking about the old songs and stories. We talk about the hunting and the fishing and the gardening and how you doing. And you have to make small talk, and eventually the conversation comes around to the old songs and stories. And then if things are going well, then I can finally bring up the topic of the Jersey Devil. And Emil Brown was very cooperative, and so was his wife Flora. Emil says, well, Doc, true, this is Woodland Township of Burlington County, and this is the capital of the Pines. but you're in the wrong place looking for the Jersey Devil. He says, the real place to look for the Jersey Devil is south of here. You got to go to Atlantic County. Well, by now I'd spent the whole day on this fool's errand, so I had to go back to Rutgers and reconnoiter and rethink the project. So I went to the Rutgers University Research Archives, and I went through the old maps, and sure enough, Emil Brown was right. Take a close look at this map. There you have the Mullica River flowing from the northwest to the southeast along various towns such as Greenbrook and Lower Bank. And sure enough, if you look carefully, the woodcut, it shows a duck and the waterfowl, and there in the woodcut is the Jersey Devil himself. So I said, now we got something. Let's go down to the Mullica River, let's go to Atlantic County. So I also found a book. It was by McCloy and Miller called The Jersey Devil. Came out in 1976, which was when I was doing most of this work. And in the McCloy and Miller book, there's this picture of the house, which is said to be the actual birthplace of the Jersey Devil. But by the time I came along, this house had collapsed. So again, I got out my Coast and Geodetic Survey maps, the scale of 1 inch to 10,000 feet, and it shows Leeds Point, which is said to be the actual birthplace of the Jersey Devil. Leeds Point is that green figure of land pointing out into the Atlantic Ocean. It's about 6 miles by air north of Atlantic City. So to get there, I went south on Route 9 until I got to Smithville, which is kind of South Jersey's answer to Colonial Williamsburg. and I turned right on Moss Mill Road, which took me to Leeds Point Road, descending gradually to the ocean. I stopped off at the Leeds Point Post Office to get some leads for my research. No pun intended. And then I finally found myself at Leeds Point, the object of my journey. But I have to tell you, it's disappointing. What am I supposed to see here? There's greenhead flies. It's just empty marsh. There's nothing there. Very disappointing. And it turns out the whole area was a national wildlife refuge. They used to bring busloads of school children to admire the waterfowl, but the kids kept wandering off, so they finally closed the area. And I looked around, and finally I went back to Smithville. I was just so frustrated. And sure enough, there's plenty of evidence in the church records, in the courthouse records, in the cemeteries. There may or may not be a Jersey Devil, but for sure there is a Leeds family, and they've been there for hundreds of years. And some of the Leeds families have very prominent positions in the local society. So then I go back to Leeds Point, and looking around, I find a place, it's called the Oyster Creek Inn. And as a folklorist, I do some of my best work in bars. And so I engaged the bartender in conversation. The same rigmarole. You can't just start out with the Jersey Devil. You got to do the hunting, the fishing, the gardening, the small talk, yada, 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 yada. Finally, you get around to the Jersey Devil. Bartender says, I think I can help you. Let me get an envelope here, I'll make you a sketch. And so, what do you know? He says, I can show you with my sketch the actual birthplace of the Jersey Devil. I thought, oh, well, okay, I'm on it. And so here's the house, said to be the actual birthplace of the Jersey Devil. Trouble is, the family lives there are tired of people like me coming around. And I think the architectural historians amongst us will say this house doesn't really look like it dates back to 1735. But anyway, it makes a good story. This is the alleged birthplace of the Jersey Devil. And you remember the story from the top of the hour, that the Jersey Devil was a creature with the head of a horse, the torso of a man, the legs of a goat, the feet of a bat, and a long serpentine tail. Now, over the years, there's been hundreds of sightings, often by respectable local people, sheriffs, state troopers, ministers, rabbis, priests, people with a reputation in the community. And the general description is the creature has the head of a horse, the torso of a man, the feet of a goat, bat-like wings, and a long serpentine tail. In fact, there is a group called the Jersey Devil Hunters, and what they do is when somebody has a sighting, they'll try and set them down with a sketch artist and get them to show what it is that they saw. Now, you know, talking to a group of folklorists, you know that a diagnostic criterion of folklore is that it exists in different versions. And so some of the creatures don't resemble the archetype. This one looks to me more like a gargoyle. Now, this is the educational portion. So is it a myth? No, I don't think so. It's not far away and long ago. Is it a legend? Well, I think so. Not so long ago, 1735, and a conventional earthly locale. What could be more conventional than South Jersey? So, as you're going through the woods, you never know what lurks behind the next tree. Now, in the book by McCloy Miller, there's many interesting stories. We can only touch on a few. But back in 1976, Mr. Hunt, who was the proprietor of the Hunt Brothers Circus, which was in Florence, New Jersey, just outside of Trenton, Mr. Hunt, he grew up in South Jersey, and he figured if he could get the capture of the Jersey Devil, it'd be a great addition to his circus. So he put up a $100,000 reward back in 1976. But sad to say, to this day, not a single penny of that reward money has ever been collected. Here's the original edition of the Jersey Devil book. My friends, the elementary school librarians, say that this is the book most often stolen from elementary school libraries. Perhaps because in New Jersey schools, fourth graders are required to study New Jersey history, and this is used for their book reports. But a friend of mine says, no, well, the reason it's stolen is the Jersey Devil thinks it's an unflattering account. So anyway, in the book, there's many interesting stories, not the least of which is a story concerning the admiral here, Commodore Stephen Decatur. A very interesting story. Commodore Stephen Decatur was a very successful, young, promising naval officer. He married a Philadelphia debutante. He was selected by President Thomas Jefferson to go fight the Barbary pirates, and he was outfitted with a flotilla of 3 ships. But before he went to fight the Barbary pirates, he wanted to have the very latest in munitions. In those days, the best cannon factory was at the Hanover Iron Works deep in the Pine Barrens. So according to the story, he takes a crew of his best gunners down to the Hanover Iron Works deep in the pines to test fire the cannons before accepting delivery for his ships. And he sets up a firing range, and he's testing the cannons, and lo and behold, much to his surprise, they see the Jersey Devil scampering across the firing line. The gunners open up on the Jersey Devil. A cannonball strikes the Jersey Devil and passes through the body of the Jersey Devil, who scampers into the pines, apparently alive and unharmed. Now, I know that sounds like a preposterous story, but if it's a lie, it's the only lie that Decatur ever told, because he was legendary for his honesty. So in my research, I met with a 12th generation descendant of the Leeds family, Mr. William Leeds. He was a retired paratrooper from the U.S. Army. We were doing a show for a predecessor of Monster Quest, and we compared the versions of the story. Mr. Leeds operates a shot and beer establishment on the approach road to Atlantic City, and we had generally concurred on the way that the story went. Now, another interesting thing about this whole legend is back in January of 1909, there was a rash of sightings. Now take a look at the places where the Jersey Devil was sighted. Burlington, Pemberton, Haddonfield, Collingswood, Moorestown, Riverside. If you know your New Jersey geography, a lot of these places are in eastern New Jersey, adjacent to Philadelphia, what today would be Philadelphia suburbs. But back in the day, these were farms. Okay, there was a rash of sightings. It alarmed people. Now, here's what happened. Because there was a rash of sightings, the Philadelphia newspapers sent out teams. There was usually a reporter and an illustrator. And they interviewed the farmers. And they came up with these drawings based on the eyewitness accounts. So this is all from the 1909 scare. For the Philadelphia Evening Bulletin, this was one version. Here's another version from the Philadelphia Press, shows the Jersey Devil with a top hat smoking a cigar. Here is another version from the Philadelphia Public Ledger showing the Jersey Devil as the fearsome Jabberwock. Here's one from the Philadelphia Press showing the Jersey Devil as a kind of a long bug with a top hat, smoking a pipe, and carrying a cane. Here he is, holding an umbrella, reading newspaper accounts about himself. Here the Jersey Devil is holding a balloon while having just laid an egg. And I don't know, this is with an exaggerated horse's head. Well, you can see where this is going. Obviously, these city slicker reporters were not taking the whole thing very seriously. They turned it into a joke. They turned it into a cartoon. This is all in 1909. Well, it's all good fun, but here's the problem. Pineys are not stupid. The Pineys, they read the newspapers too. And they said, here's this horrible, fearsome, awesome creature, and these city slickers are coming out here and they're mocking us and they're making fun of us. So guess what? We're not going to talk to these people anymore. So it made things very difficult for people like me coming along some 60 years later in the 70s trying to get these families to talk about it. My belief is that a lot of these old South Jersey families, they really do believe in the Jersey Devil, but they don't want to talk about it to outsiders for fear of being ridiculed. It makes field work on the Jersey Devil very, very difficult. So anyway, 1909 was the great Jersey Devil scare, and years later, there was a man named Norman Jeffries. He was the proprietor of a private museum at 9th and Arch Streets in Philadelphia. And he figured if he could stage the capture of the Jersey Devil, it'd be a great moneymaker for his museum. But of course, he really couldn't capture the Jersey Devil, but he did the next best thing. He went to a small zoo in upstate New York, and he rented a kangaroo. He brought the kangaroo back to Philadelphia. He turned the kangaroo loose in Fairmount Park. He staged the capture of the kangaroo, brought the kangaroo back to the basement of his museum at 9th and Arch Street. And then he painted green stripes on the kangaroo and attached a set of fake wings to the kangaroo and put the kangaroo on display. Well, so far so good. And then the idea was that he would charge admission to come see the Jersey Devil, and he would give people a brief glimpse, and he would lower the curtain. He would discharge those people and bring in a new group of paying customers. But there was a problem. The kangaroo was homesick for upstate New York, and the kangaroo became depressed and lethargic and didn't put on much of a show. So Norman Jeffries, he hired a 9-year-old boy, and he put the boy behind the cage. He got a broomstick. He attached a nail to the broomstick. He hid the boy under a bunch of burlap bags, and when a new group of people would come in, the boy would poke the kangaroo, and the kangaroo would jump up and yell out of pain and put on a good show for the people. And that's the truth. Well, 20 years later, the hoax was revealed, but by then Norman Jeffries didn't care. He'd already made his money. Even in relatively modern times, there's still problems. This is a long story, but bear with me. What happened is, the farmer, F.A. Freilinger on the right, he reported strange tracks, and he said that it was probably the Jersey Devil in these strange tracks. And so he called in the state troopers. The state troopers, frankly, they have no education in tracking. They didn't know what the hell they were looking at. So they called in Wesley Gibbs, the guy in the baseball cap over on the far left, and he was an expert tracker. They brought him down to Gibbsboro, and he took one look, and Wesley Gibbs said, "This can't possibly be the Jersey Devil, because we all know the Jersey Devil has a cloven hoof. And besides," he said, "this appears to me to be a bear track. And not only that, based on my years of examining these things, it's not just a bear track, it's the left rear paw of the brown bear." So that was his hypothesis. Sure enough, 3 days later, an implement with the bear paw was found in a barn nearby. Here from the Rutgers Research Archives is a picture of that bear paw print. Well, in my investigations with the Stoke State Forest, I talked to one of the senior forest rangers, and it was an interesting, frank conversation. He said that when he was a young man, he was very skeptical about these stories of the Jersey Devil, but there's so many strange things that happen in the forest that he tries to keep an open mind. Now, more recently, I made a repeat visit to Leeds Point, and I was quite shocked to see that a real estate developer had put in a housing development at Leeds Point. So I picked up a copy of the builder's brochure, but there was no mention of the Jersey Devil. So here I was back at Leeds Point. There's not a whole lot to see. There's a shellfish refrigeration station. There is the Oyster Creek Inn. I did this television show with these Monster Quest people, but they kept asking. He said, "Well, is there really a Jersey Devil?" And as a folklorist, I have to have sort of an agnostic position. And I kept saying, well, there may or may not be a Jersey Devil, but for sure we have a story. And that's not exactly what they wanted to hear. But I stuck to my story. Well, anyway, at Smithville, which I recommend, there is a gift shop, and you can buy postcards with the Jersey Devil. This is the Ed Sheets classical drawing. Here is a Jersey Devil mixing his favorite brew. You can buy bumper stickers, says smile, you're in Smithville, home of the Jersey Devil. Here's a close-up of the Jersey Devil in Dayglow purple. Or you can buy lapel buttons in the more traditional devil red. Now, those with children can buy these Jersey Devil t-shirts. These are my two sons, and the t-shirt appropriately says, "I'm a little Jersey Devil." Now, to further my research, I stopped off at the Smithville Inn. And in the lower left-hand corner of the menu of the Smithville Inn, it says, "We're famous for our Jersey Devil cocktail." So I figured this is an important part of my research. I ordered a Jersey Devil cocktail. It was so good, I ordered a second one. And so I said to the bartender, "I really like this drink. Can I have the recipe?" He said, "I'm sorry, sir, it's a house secret." I slipped him $20. I now have the recipe. If you slip me $20, I'll give you the recipe. So here's the Jersey Devil cocktail served in traditional Jersey Devil glassware. So what can we say about the Jersey Devil? There is a slim trickle of oral tradition among the old-timers. There are physical artifacts, if not physical evidence. There's family genealogies. There's the cemetery. We have the drawings done by police sketch artists. But alas, it seems that the sun is setting on authentic Jersey Devil legends. Now, before I let you go, hang in there. I have just a few additional remarks, but I want to make them from downstairs at the stage. Now, the thing is, I'm a little upset as a folklorist because what's happened over the years is that this legend of this awesome, fearsome creature has sort of morphed from folk culture into popular culture, and I attribute the change mainly due to the fact that some 20 years ago, there was a naming contest for the hockey team. And they decided to call the hockey team the New Jersey Devils. And so what's happened, I noticed at Rutgers, is that once you have the hockey team named the New Jersey Devils, there's a great deal of name recognition. People do recognize the name of the Jersey Devil, but they don't associate it with the traditional legend. They associate it with popular culture. And there's a lot of things wrong with naming the hockey team the New Jersey Devils. For one thing, traditionally, it's the Jersey Devil singular, never was plural. The other thing is, if you really know South Jersey, the people in that area, they don't refer to the Jersey Devil. It's always the Leeds Devil. And it's even more complicated than that. There's two old families down in that area, the Leeds family and the Shorts family. And the Shorts family say it's the Leeds Devil, and the Leeds family say it's the Shorts Devil. In any event, my point is that this creature in traditional South Jersey folk culture is evil, is awesome, is fearsome. This is a creature known to slit the throats of babies in their cribs. It's not a cartoon character. It's not a joke. And so, bear with me. I want to read you a poem which I think captures some of the original awe and mystery and terror of this creature. It's written by South Jersey poet Linda Reddington, and it goes like this. She cursed the day that she and Leeds were wed. Heavy with life, she held her head and cried to the midwife, silent and grim, 12 children I have given him. Still young, I am old and sick with wear. 12 hungry mouths, 12 burdens to bear. I was fair and strong when the bands were red, with velvet cheek, flaxen head, sparkling of eye and silken of limb. But I had to go and marry him. What would I give to escape this life, to have no pain, to be no man's wife, no children to tend, no chores to be done, to be young once again, to have some fun. Oh, what I would give to end this birth, this horrible weight, this obscene girth. I'd like to bear the devil's child, all claw and fang, all fierce and wild. Such sweet revenge to see Leeds' face when he finds a beast in the baby's place. The wood fire leaped and began to crackle. The room was filled with a demon cackle. The woman screamed and the quiet returned. In the dim, still room, her pale eyes burned. She shivered and shook with fear and dread. I didn't mean it, those things I said. Hush, my dear, the midwife said. Your labor's begun. Best go to bed. The woman writhed on her dank, soiled cot. The fire blazed, the room grew hot. It bathed the walls in a hellish red. The midwife swabbed her damp forehead and drew the child from its mother's womb. A hideous shriek ripped through the room. A claw shot out and scratched the cheek of the midwife, now too dumb to speak. It slashed and tore, left her dead, then turned and lifting its horse-like head, gave a silly smile to its mother there, a giggling idiot twisting her hair. Her youth regained, but to no avail, it stroked her face with its serpentine tail, gave a practiced shrug of each leathery wing, and flew up the chimney in one great spring. Now it prowls the pines in the damp of night when a sickly moon sends its dimmest light. A child of darkness who leaves in the sand a cloven hoof print, the mark of a hand. A broken branch or a claw, who knows? But the wise old piney never goes alone in the barrens late at night. He fears the hawk's deadly flight, avoids the red orchid, passes it by, leaves it to feed the carrion fly, starts at the sudden crack of a twig. Something's moving there, something big. There are charms to be carried. Don't tempt the fates. The Jersey Devil watches and waits. We have a few minutes. I know everybody's eager to have another drink and get to sleep, but if there's any questions. Oh, in the back, yes.
A couple of things, Angus. I noticed you just mentioned having another drink, and I was thinking about those two cocktails that you showed, and I remember that you mentioned a shot in a beer establishment, and I think you also showed a liquor store with yourself in front of it. I've enjoyed your books, and I like the part you made about the maps. I wondered if there might be a book in the future that would be watering holes of the pine barrens.
I like that idea, yeah. Well, actually, I'm glad you mentioned that because there is a connection. People often say, well, how did this legend of the Jersey Devil last for more than 250 years? And it's interesting to speculate what is the function of the story in piney folk society. And I have a couple of theories on this. One of the things that they say about the Pine Barrens is the Pine Barrens was a refuge. It was a place for people with a past who wanted to get away, people with a criminal record, Hessian deserters, Huguenot dissenters, Quaker rebels, descendants of escaped slaves and Tuscarora Indians. I mean, it makes a great story. And then what did these people do to make a living? Well, they were often dealing, so the story goes, with contraband. You've heard of Jersey lightning, or Jersey Applejack, illegal alcohol made from illegal stills deep in the pines. Well, think about it. You're making apple brandy illegally. You're selling it in New York and Philadelphia surreptitiously. You don't want alcohol, tobacco, and firearms agents snooping around. So you promote the story that the Pines is a dangerous place. And many a revenuer came into the Pines and never came out. And that's because the Jersey Devil got him. Thank you, Charlie. Another explanation. Think about it. In the early days of the Republic, there was no income tax. How did the early Republic get its money? It was all through customs duties. So you have these ships coming over from Europe. They go to the port of Philadelphia. They pay their customs duty. They go to the port of New York. They pay their customs duty. But who would be so sappy as to pay customs duty? You could go to a place like Tuckerton, say, and just offload the cargo, put it on a Conestoga wagon, and avoid the tax. Again, you don't want revenuers snooping around. You promote the story that the Pines is a dangerous place and the Jersey Devil will get you. In other words, it's a functional story. I'll give you another example. You're a parent. You have kids. The Pines can be a dangerous place. What do you tell your kids? Come home before dark or the Jersey Devil will get you. It works so well that when those kids grow up, they tell the same story to their kids. It helps perpetuate the story. Thank you, Charlie, for that riff. Yeah. Okay, any more questions? Okay, have a good night cocktail, and we'll see you in the morning.